than those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting organizations. For more information about creating your own television program with Access Fort Wayne, call 421-1250.
Hello, and welcome to the American Veteran. I'm Dale Parrish, your host. Our co-host is Carl Fowler. And sitting in with us is Mark Williams. He's a member of the Korean War Veterans Association. But our guest today is Jack Hannigan. He's a member of the DAV, the American Legion, Allen County Genealogy Society, and also a member of the Korean War Veterans Association. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you, Dale.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Yeah. When did you join the Army? It was the Army, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
1953, right out of high school.
Right out of high school.
Right.
Yeah.
I come from a military family.
Did you?
My dad was a lieutenant in the Second World War, and my grandfather was a lieutenant in the First World War.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So, and my sons carried on over the rest of the generation.
Just a natural progression for you,
yes.
then, wasn't it?
Yes.
Your sons are in now?
No, they're out. My oldest boy retired as a master sergeant with 20 years. My youngest boy, he was in the Gulf War, got injured. Marines said that he couldn't perform his duty, and he was medically discharged.
Yeah.
So yeah, it runs deep in the family.
Yeah, you seem to know a lot about the Cold War.
Well, that's true. I consider myself, even though I was in Korea to the early part of Vietnam, I consider myself a Cold War vet.
Yeah.
And how this came about was sort of interesting. In my days when I was about 14, 15, 16, I got interested in electronics and then eventually Morse code. So when I enlisted in the Army, as an infantryman for 16 weeks basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and with the idea that I would probably go and see combat in Korea. About the third week of my initial basic training at Fort Dix, I was ordered to go see a colonel. And the colonel said, we have an option for you. And he laid out this. He said, your electronics scores and your Morse code scores, he said, we'd like to have you in what we call the Army Security Agency. He said, you'll complete 8 weeks of training, and then we'll send you to a technical school, and that's in line with our community, and then you'll go to your station. So, true to his word, at the end of 8 weeks, I went down to Fort Gordon, Georgia, went through what was called high-speed operator, where you listen to Morse code, and on a mill you type the 5 groups, and then also to what they call cryptographer school. Upon completion, I was sent back to Arlington Hall Station, which was the headquarters for the Army Security Agency. And up until that time, I had a secret crypto clearance, and when my top secret crypto clearance came in, I was assigned to what was called the No Such Agency. The No Such Agency today is NSA, National Security Agency. And I went to work in their communications room, operating different circuits around the world, embassies, and all. So I got familiar with other locations of the world through that. And I had a watch officer, Captain Gainey, and he sort of took me under his wing and sort of convinced me to re-enlist for 6 years and continue my education by going to teletype maintenance and crypto maintenance school. And after I got through that in August of '57, I went to Korea. And actually going to Korea was a decision that I made. I actually was assigned to Army Security Agency Pacific, Camp Oji. And when I got there, I was married, had 2 children. I was of the rank that my family could join me over there. And I thought Japanese would be a tremendous culture to learn. Well, they told me that because of space availability up in Hokkaido, that my wife wouldn't be there for 16, 18 months. So I asked what alternatives I had, and they said, well, we have an opening in Korea. So I ended up flying in from Tachikawa Air Force Base to Seoul, well, actually K-14, Kimpo, and got off the plane. And of course, I had a little culture shock in Japan. When I grew up and I seen on the movie screens, they were always small and wore glasses and were yellow. And I found out that, hey, these people were big, and they were very friendly. Well, I found out that when I got to Korea, oh man, what did I get into? In 1957, the Koreans didn't want to use the railway that the Japanese had built for them as a result of World War II. Sigmund Rhee was in power. General MacArthur was a god. They had statues of General MacArthur there. And I went to a little town called Yeongdeung-po, which was the rail terminus for Seoul. And that was my 508th group. And ran into Captain Gainey again. And he said, you took my advice, and I'm glad to see you.
Yeah.
So then I went into, from there I went to Seoul for about 3 weeks of training on what our mission was, the security mission was in Korea at that time. And then I went to my main base, which was the 321st Battalion at Uijeonbu, which was right off the main supply line up to Camp KC and Camp Edwards. I reported in. I found out that I was the battalion crypto repairman, communications specialist. And that meant I was on call 24 hours a day. I had 3 companies to support in the battalion. And most of those companies were the lookout companies that you were talking about in your tour over there. Right. I'd go up there with rotors, keyless, maintain their equipment. Always travel with a 45 on my hip, and in my Jeep I had a carbine. So I ran quite a bit of the DMZ and saw quite a bit. One of the things that was surprising to me over there was that in one of the outposts on the North Central, I think it was North Central, it was right around Panmunjom, you could look through the binoculars and you could see what they called White City. And White City was where they kept our prisoners of war initially. And of course, in order for the North Koreans to go ahead and develop their dictatorship, they built a big building there. And you could see it, and like, come on, come a little farther. And I went to Panmunjom. That was an interesting site. Panmunjom was a Quonset hut where the UN met. On one side of the table, there was a line drawn down the table, which denoted the DMZ. On one side of the table sat the UN, on the other side of the table, and they came down from a hill to show that they were supremacists. Had brick buildings.
Descend.
Yeah. Brick buildings. We had Quonset huts. And they'd come in, and our American flag was at each person, along with the United Nations flag, probably about 6 inches tall. They had 12, 14-inch flags to show their dominance. I've seen the Bridge of No Return. I'm familiar with what Mark had said earlier. And I finished my career there in Korea and came home in 1950, Christmas of 1957-58. And I was assigned again back to my headquarters at Arlington, back to NSA. And one thing that I sort of overlooked there was while I was stationed in Korea, because I was a crypto repairman, by some odd incidents, I got affiliated with CIA's communication system there. So when I got back to the States, I went back to headquarters and again assigned to the National Security Agency. We spent about 6 months back there in Arlington, Virginia, and then I got an assignment for East Africa, Asmara, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. Under the control, Eritrea was under the control by United Nations of Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. So here I had a different culture, another third world country, which the peasant could probably make $200 a year and live on, you know. But again, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of political influence. Of course, Haile Selassie was pro-American. We had a Russian group that we knew that they were there. They knew that we were there. This ended up in the Ethiopian Civil War of 1970s, where Haile Selassie was overthrown by the Dredge, the government of communist Ethiopia. Then, while I was there, we heard a little bit about what was called the Eritrean Liberation Front, but nobody paid much attention to it. Well, the Eritrean Liberation Front overthrew the Eritrean government and said that they wanted their independence. So in 1974, they kicked the United States out of Eritrea. Now, this was a massive communication system over there, much like any major command would have. Our nearest support was Saudi Arabia Air Force or Tripoli Air Force. We had Marines standing by on ships off of the port of Massawa in the case of evacuations. And now those countries are separated, and they still fight. They still have a civil war over there. Of course, there's plenty of civil wars going on that we don't pay attention to.
Yeah, sure.
I was stationed in Morocco, and the Polisario War was going on between Morocco and Mauritania over the fighting of where their boundaries was on the desert. You know, and so I lived through the Cold War, and you know, as Americans, I think if you ask the average American today, what was the Cold War? They would say, well, World War II ending to when Berlin Wall came down. But in studying history, actually the Cold War started in 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah.
And the change into Marxism. And all the turmoil that was created in the Russian Empire, and eventually the movement of Nazi Germany in 1937-38 into the early 40s, and then the attack on the Russians in 41. And then the Russians and beating the Allied forces into Berlin and the separation of Berlin. And of course then the Eastern Bloc countries came under control of Russia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. And then because of Stalin, they wanted the Americans to move out, the French and the British to go home. They wanted Berlin for themselves. They wanted to control Berlin. They didn't want them to be a free nation. So we had the Berlin crisis.
The airlift.
And then the following year, the Berlin airlift. And incidentally, in the Berlin airlift, our own 122nd Fighter Group was actually activated and deployed for a year and stationed in Chambéry, France. And they flew missions in to bring in food and goods and everything to the West Germans.
That was quite an operation.
Yes, it was.
That airlift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, I left here, well, in 52 and 54, 62 to 64, thanks to Dwight Eisenhower, which actually started, I think, in 1958, we sent in what was called, much like in Korea, the K-Mag, that, you know, after World War II, the United States had Korean military advisories training and protecting the South Koreans, and the Russians had North Korea. Well, they did the same thing in Vietnam because it had worked in Korea. And it ended up that Eisenhower was president. He made that commitment. Then that set our commitment from 1958 to 1974 to definitely support the civil wars in the French Indochina area, which included Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand. You know, the French had been defeated at the Dien Bien Phu. The Russians moved in. We moved in. You know, so actually, the Cold War was a political war. You know, there was a lot of politics. We go through, say, from 1934 forward. Of course, we had the Second World War, which was definitely the worst war in the world. Thousands of people, millions of people were killed on both sides, and even civilians. That was the first combat. And then we sort of went into I want to say maybe détente with the Russians. Everything was still Stalin in the United States, but nothing happened in 44, 45, 46. But in 47, it was the Berlin. Then it was a little quiet with negotiations. And during those quiet times, that was when people that was in my organization were very busy, you know, intercepting, infiltrating, espionage, intelligence. And then we got into Vietnam. And, of course, Vietnam was a war that should never have been fought. It was strictly political. Kennedy tried to get out of Vietnam. He made a decision that he was going to pull the American troops out of South Vietnam and let them fight. Hence, he was replaced by Lyndon Johnson, and Johnson went ahead and escalated the war. 575,000 American troops in Vietnam. And then it sort of went silent again. Détente, Nixon, and Khrushchev overthrew Stalin. Nixon went to China to make up with Mao. On and on. It developed. Carter, during his, Nixon met also with Brezhnev in Russia, and they came about with the SALT I Treaty, which said that they were going to limit missiles and you couldn't develop nuclear missiles or anti-ballistic missiles. This was approved by both sides. When Jimmy Carter got in, he tried to SALT II, and it was not agreeable to the Russians. So then Jimmy went ahead and he supported the Islamic community that was being persecuted by the Russians. So we had an ally of Pakistan, and in Pakistan they had much security as our CIA and all that, intelligence agencies. And we convinced them by giving them money to go ahead and supply and train Muslims to pull a jihad on the Soviet Union.
Right.
And it didn't work. So the Cold War was just broader than what the average American thinks of today. And then it entered into the third world, Africa. And in Africa we had the civil war between Eritrea and Ethiopia. We had the civil war between Angola and the Danish, where we sent in Danish paratroopers under the UN to crush the rebels. I find out that there was other insurrections throughout the continent. We as the United States joined the apartheid or whatever they were called of South Africa, and with other South African communities we started to supply other countries, both existing governments for support and also rebels for. So the Cold War was really a understanding that our country wasn't really prepared for it, but we got then down here to Nicaragua and Chile in South America, and then Khrushchev was overthrown and other leaders came in, and then finally we had this gentleman in the Soviet Union called Mikhail Gorbachev. And it's hard for me to pronounce the names, but there was, in 1981, there was a decision made that maybe we would look inward to ourselves and change. Of course, right before that, a famous actor, Ronald Reagan, became president of the United States, and he made a statement that during his term he would make sure that communism was just an ash heap of history. And he met with Gorbachev, and through several meetings they came to an agreement. And as a result, in 1991, the Iron Curtain, or the Berlin Wall, came down, and people in different organizations, different groups of people were either pro-freedom or pro-communist still. But it sort of became real quiet, and both of the Russians today and the Americans today and the free world of Western Europe and Eastern Europe and the third world countries, we starting to live a normal life.
It's not, interrupt here, it's not well known, but the Vatican had a lot to do with the end of the communism.
Yes. Yeah. But it's 4 or 5 centuries. I mean, if you go back to 1917, it's 7 centuries of nothing but war.
There's war going on over this world constantly,
Yes.
one place or another.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that part of the ending of the Cold War, Ronald Reagan brought Gorbachev to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
He also brought some of the Russian generals,
Yes.
military people over, and they took them on tours of our military bases and showed them some of our better armaments, so this way, which had been concealed up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And the Russians saw what we had and realized they could not compete financially and so forth, manpower, and that was part of that ending of the Cold War.
Right. Right.
We put our cards on the table, so
Right.
to speak, to them. Said, "Here's what we got." They looked at it and said, "Hey, you know, we really don't want any of this," and that helped.
I understand Gorbachev is in California. Have you heard that?
What?
Gorbachev is in California.
Haven't heard that, but that doesn't surprise me.
I don't know where I heard that or why he's there, but
We've been a harbor and a haven for quite a few of the political
Right.
world leaders, and whether it's justified or not, I don't know. But that's not my decision to make. So
When I got out of the service, I got out of the service as a result of a family emergency. I had almost 11 years in, and my first wife passed away.
oh,
that's tragic.
She had a cancer of the brain, and she's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. So I went in to see my commanding officer, and I told him, I said, you know, what do I do? I need help. I had 4 children, ages 7 to a baby. So the chaplain told me that it was my choice. It was a difficult choice. But if I stayed in the military, I could stay right there at the headquarters for the next 10 years. If I became a civilian and raised my children locally there in Arlington, Virginia, that was a choice I would have to make. So I went back to my commanding officer and I told him, I said, sir, I said, I've been overseas most of my tours. I've been away from the families. I think I would like to get out. So they went ahead and they said, within 30 days you'll be out. They processed me out. I got out on October the 1st, 1964. When I got out of the service, I was immediately hired by the Army Security Agency as an equipment specialist.
That was a good stroke of good luck.
Well, no.
They had it planned that way.
It was political.
Yes, it was planned that way.
Yes. Well,
Jack, make it quick.
Huh?
Make it quick.
So then I came here and I settled in Fort Wayne in 1968. Magnavox hired me.
Great.
And I spent 37 years with Magnavox.
Okay. Jack, I'm glad you was our
Thank you for your
guest
service,
today.
Jack.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us. If you meet a veteran or someone in uniform, just walk up to them, shake their hand, say thank you for your service. Remember, freedom is not free. Thank you, and good night.